All right, welcome everybody. Hey, this is our monthly VIP call. Glad to have you guys on because we decided to do video this time instead of just the usual phone call, and good to see some of your faces here live. And I know the rest of you're watching it, and well, we can't see you, so it's good either way to have you. Uh, quick little reminder of things to come. Many of you guys have been asking me, when am I going to do the virtual mastermind again, like we did back in May? The next one's going to come up in January. I debate about December, but I figure with holiday season, that might be a little crazy. So January, it's probably going to be the either the 15th or the 22nd. I'm leaning more towards the 22nd. So we'll get some firm dates on that, but that'll be the next virtual one. And we'll still do some live ones coming in 2021 now. And we'll get you those dates, especially as I start to hear other dates showing up in my calendar for 2021 as well. So be looking for that. But the next virtual one that we'll do, that's usually like a half day. That one's going to be, like I said, probably January 21st. Was that what I said? No, 22nd, whatever that Friday is in January. All right. So today, guys, by the way, next month, we're going to have a great call coming up to be ready for that. I'm actually working and creating some new things for you guys to use to track your cash flow with. So I'm going to start releasing a new cash flow optimizer to come, but I'm going to wait until our next month's call for that one. In the meantime, though, this is one I've had planned for over a month as well. Many of you have asked me, said, "Hey, Chris, I've been reading that what would the Rockefellers do book, right?" Or I've been hearing different stuff about, you talked about estate planning and family legacy and things like that. And how do we pass that on? And not just the money, but even just how do we pass on more than just the money? Because like I asked you in the email preparing for this call today, is if you had a choice to pass on one or the other, whether it's money or the knowledge to create more money, which would you rather choose? And of course, I would imagine most of you would say, hey, I don't mind. Well, some of you do mind pass on money to your kids because we've talked about that. But others, you might say, I'd rather pass on for them to create their own thing, create their own money and do it in a way better than I did, or learn it at a younger age. And so that's why I brought Brandon on. Brandon came highly recommended. I've had other estate attorneys that I've used in the past, and Brandon actually is a protege of the same attorneys that I've used as well. And this is something that with the family legacy planning is just not as commonly taught out there, and it's definitely not commonly practiced among attorneys. So, Brandon, welcome. Glad to have you on, man.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think maybe the easiest way to kind of introduce what I do is kind of leading off of, Chris, the question that you just said that you would ask people in preparation for this. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions that I enjoy asking people as we're starting to develop a relationship and get to know what motivates them and help them understand the uniqueness of my approach. It's a question that I'll throw out there as kind of as a rhetorical question, but just kind of think that through, which is, let's imagine that you have 30 minutes to spend with your loved ones for a last conversation before you died. What would you want to talk to them about? And what I have found, as I talk with people about that, is more people explicitly say, quote unquote, not money, than people who actually give an answer revolving around money. Now, if your first thought was talking to them about money, I'm not casting aspersions on you in any way, shape, or form, but really what that does is point out that what most people want to be talking to their loved ones about has nothing to do with money. But ultimately, that's exactly what traditional estate planning does, is it takes that last conversation, which is, if you think about it, the estate plan itself, the will or the trust or whatever documents you have, that is the last conversation that you have with your loved ones. And it is only about money. And lots of times what that does, unconsciously, maybe even accidentally, it distills your legacy down into dollars and cents rather than the qualitative aspects of life, whether it's your values, your wisdom, your life experiences and life lessons, your advice, aspirations, motivations, affection, all of those things that make up life kind of gets lost a little bit, lost in the shuffle, if you will. And so what what I've tried to do in my practice is integrate what you care most about in life with your estate plan. And that's something that is kind of broadly called in my industry as purposeful planning. So adding some intentionality and purposeness to the estate plan itself, so that it's not just dollars and cents, but it's all of those other things that honestly kids tend to care more about. If you ask them which they would rather receive from you, is it money or a recorded distillation of those things that you care about, your values, your personal history, your family memories, how much you love them and how proud you are of them. That's the one that they're most likely going to be choosing, and the ones that they get emotional about, as they learn that they have the ability to continue to engage with those positive memories and those personality traits and aspects that you had, rather than just simply the money that you're passing on, right? So what does that actually look like? So for me, at least, is a series of different exercises. Maybe the one that makes the most sense and is maybe a little bit more concrete for most people is honestly is the first set of exercises that I give to people. And what it is it's so if any of you have a trust, or if you know anything about a trust, the one thing for purposes of this exercise is that you just need to know is trusts have a name. And that's really all we need to worry about it for today. Is a trust has a name. For the most part, it's your name with trust thrown on the end. Doesn't mean a whole lot. It's pretty vanilla. But what purposeful exercises or purposeful planning does is it can help you inculcate and inject some meaning into even the basic name of the trust. So for example, so my personal trust would be the Brandon and Emily Rains Living Trust, right? Just first names, last name with Living Trust that are on the end. We went through this purposeful exercise ourselves, and we decided that we wanted to name our trust the Rains Family Eternal Priorities Trust. And we wrote up why we named it that. So we're people of faith. So that's kind of where eternal comes from. We care deeply. We believe that your last name means something, right? And so the Rains family is there. We want it to kind of be a multi-generational qualitative legacy, right? Not connected to the money. But there are certain things that there are certain ways that we live out our lives with that more maybe long-term, even eternal perspective. And then priorities, wanting our kids to learn to not kind of fritter away their time and their money, but identify those things that are a priority to them and focus on that, right? And I'm not on here on a soapbox of trying to impose my value system on you guys, but we wrote all of that down so that they can understand why we named it that way, rather than just, what did mom and dad mean by Rains Family Eternal Priorities Trust? We wrote it down, and by the time we had finished writing it down, my wife got emotional about it as she read it through, because she felt like it just touched on so clearly and so closely and deeply to what we care about, that she got emotional as she read about it. And then just to throw out some other examples that I've seen with some of my clients. I'm not going to remember all of them because there's probably about 2 or 3 dozen at this point, but the Discover Trust, Legacy of Love Trust, the Beacon Legacy Trust, the Make Memories Trust, the Because I Love You More Than Life Itself Trust, the Live Your Best Life Trust, the Nest Egg Trust, Make Memories Trust. A lot of legacy in there. I've seen a Family Inside Joke be used as the name of the trust. Let me see, the If We Could Do It, You Can Do It Too Trust. And you get the idea, right? So it's this really wide range of possibilities that just encapsulates what people care about, or what's the purpose of the trust. There's also the Rainy Day Fund Trust is one that I've seen. And that's a reflection of what she wants, of what she wanted the trust to do and be, but also probably a little bit of a reflection of on her and how she's lived her life as well, knowing that she's an accountant. It's probably a little bit of reflection on that. And so really what that does is, at least for me, and I can only speak for myself with what I'm going to say, but my trusts have a title page. So they open up their trust. Their very first impression of their trust is the name. And then they turn the page, and that's the write-up of why they named it that way. Even before clients get the table of contents or page one, and especially even before they get to the language saying how much money they're getting and when are they getting it and how and why and all that different stuff, their first two impressions are, this is the name and this is our value system that informed the name that we've given the trust. And then everything else that comes later on is seen through that lens, right? And so even then, we're not controlling, but positively influencing or molding how a child is interacting with that money. Because ultimately, money is just a tool. It can be either destructive or constructive. And I've never had a client come in and walk in through my door and say, I want my kid's life to be worse off than before. I really want to mess my kid's life, mess it up. Never heard that happen. Well, I've never heard a client come in and say that that's their goal, but there are plenty of studies out there that show that that happens all too often. So one study has been going on for 30 to 40 years, since the 1980s, and it's interviewed thousands of beneficiaries, asking, has your inheritance been a blessing or a burden in your life? And 80% of beneficiaries have said that it's a burden rather than a blessing. It's a mental, emotional, relational, physical, financial burden. They quit their job early. They view it as blood money, and so they either blow through it or they never touch it. It's ruined their relationship with their siblings. They've relapsed into addictions, all these different things. Only 10% were able to say that it's a blessing, and the other 10% were undecided. Another study found that on average, an inheritance is completely spent within 24 months. And for higher net worth and ultra high net worth families, that inheritance has an 8-year half-life. So within 8 years, that total money has been halved, and then halved again every 8 years. Another study has found that a third of all beneficiaries have negative savings within 24 months. Really kind of what this kind of gets to is that receiving an inheritance is kind of like winning the lottery. And that has its own terrible statistic as well. But in some ways, receiving an inheritance is harder than winning the lottery, because you have grief and loss thrown into the mix with a myriad of possible emotional reactions to that grief and loss. Whereas purposeful planning, because we're talking about creating a name for the trust and setting that groundwork to explaining why you're doing this. What's the purpose? Is it to save on taxes, or is it to pass more money on to them because you love them? Or it's other purposeful exercises that I provide my clients, like how we won the child lottery, memories of the day that you were born, the gift of wisdom. If you have family heirlooms, what are the stories behind those family heirlooms, and why has it stayed in the family? What are those values that you adhere to that have informed your life decisions that you've made? Things like that. Some of them aren't legal in nature at all. It's just providing you with the structure and the forum to write down explicit conversations with your loved ones that hopefully all of us are probably having around the dinner table anyway, or during the holidays, but we haven't necessarily been intentional about it, maybe as explicit about it, and certainly not recorded. But the beauty of the recording is that whether it's written down or audiovisual recording or whatever that is, we're fighting against memory loss. And ultimately, memory loss is something that we're all fighting with. An example that I have with that is I've had some of these conversations with my dad as I'm trying to get him to buy into purposeful planning, because there's so many things that I don't know. It's kind of like, what is it, Donald Rumsfeld? No, he says that there's threats that we know that we don't know, and there's other ones that we don't know that we don't know. I feel like it's kind of that way with my dad. There's some things that I know that I don't know, and some things that I probably have no idea that I don't know. But I've had conversations with him, I think about 2 years ago, about the 5 most important things to him, or his top 5 values. I have forgotten within 3 months, I forgot 2 of those 5 things. And within 2 years, I've forgotten another one of those 5. So I've forgotten 60% of what my dad said was most important to him within 2 years. And this is what I tell people to do on a professional basis, is to record this stuff. The only 2 that I remember were the ones that I got right, because I thought about it before. And I only came up with 3, and I got 1 wrong and I got 2 right. And I only remember the 2 that I got right, which was faith and family. That's about as slam dunk as you can get. This doesn't mean a whole lot. And so, but if I can't remember what my dad cares about when he's gone, how can I engage with him when I need counsel, when I need advice, when I need a pick me up? Let alone how can I help my children who are 6 and younger? How can I help them know who their grandfather was and engage with him, or their grandmother, or anybody like that? So it's definitely what I call it. It's passing on a legacy of wealth and wisdom, extending and broadening that conversation beyond merely traditional estate planning, which is just the dollars and cents. We don't ignore that, but again, we broaden that conversation to more than that. And lots of times it's multi-generational. Even if the money isn't multi-generational, those values can be multi-generational. A lot of ways they kind of are, but by, again, making it explicit and recording it, you make it more likely that those values will be protected and maintained, rather than running the risk that it might be lost in a highly, not political statement, highly fractured, highly divided, highly distracting society that we live in right now, where there's so many things that seem to be not anchored. Having these type of conversations or writing it down can provide an anchor to people, as you identify what's significant in your life. You can help your loved ones use your significance to help them identify their own significance in their life, and lead more purposeful and intentional lives, and therefore, being the best spouse and parent that they can be, or the best community member that they can be, as they have an impact in the larger world around them. So I just threw a lot at you guys. I don't know, Chris, if this should have been a Q&A or not, in which case you asked one question and I gave you a 22-minute answer. But that's kind of it in a nutshell, what the power and potential of purposeful planning can offer, not just you, but your loved ones in multiple generations after you.
Yeah, I'll open up with a question, and I'll open up for questions for everybody else too. The question I have is, what have you seen? Because I know my answer, but what have you seen are ways that people are trying to pass on these values, or even about passing on that wealth of knowledge that they have?
How are people trying to do it? Like before they meet with me,
Or
or
after? Yeah.
yeah, before me? I don't know that people have necessarily put in a whole lot of thought. I mean, the more that I'm in this line of work, the more I'm convinced that how we live our lives and how we parent
Mm-hmm.
is pretty reactive. We go from one crisis to the next, we go from one day to the next, but we don't necessarily sit down and debrief or write in a journal the things that happened or the lessons that we learned. And since we're reactive, what I'm trying to do is inject some proactivity into that process. And so it's taking a step back, thinking things through, writing it down. And I just don't necessarily know that I see people being proactive. And for me, it's some people grab onto purposeful planning and some people don't. The people who don't, they continue to kind of go through and reactively live their lives and live good lives, but they're not being as intentional about that legacy, right? It's Chris, you kind of mentioned I'm a protege of some of the other attorneys that you've worked with before. One of them said once, leaving a legacy is mandatory. The intentionality of you leaving a legacy is optional, right? And if you just define legacy as what type of impact do you have in people's lives, or what do people think, feel, and say about you after you're gone, we all leave a legacy. The
Mhm.
question is, that is what's optional, is how intentional do you want to be about that legacy? And I don't see a whole lot of intentionality before people come in with me, hopefully, um, with my process, which is um, structured.
Mhm.
We're injecting some proactivity into how people are going about it.
Yeah. And how are they being proactive afterward? Or how have you been proactive with yours?
Yeah, you really just have to take the time to do it. I mean, so
Mhm.
for me, I have 12 purposeful exercises that and well, this is a little bit of a longer answer. So every 6 months after my clients sign their estate plan, I just check in for a 5 to 10 minute estate planning review.
Mhm.
It's brief but comprehensive. So there's a traditional estate planning review that gets done every 6 months, but also every 6 months I give them a new purposeful exercise. And as long as they take the time to do it, then they're doing that. They're being proactive in establishing that legacy and passing on their values and stuff like that.
That's great.
Um, my hope is that they take that and it kind of changes how they live their daily lives,
Mhm.
and they become more proactive with the decisions that they're making, being more intentional um, with their legacy beyond the exercises that they give them. I don't know that that's happening.
Mhm.
Um, and that's more of a claim of ignorance rather than an expression of doubt. I don't know.
Sure.
um, but even if they did just those 12, 13 exercises I give them, they're light years ahead of where they would be otherwise. And as for me,
Yeah.
it's I have a 5 month old, so I'm not being very intentional right now. I need to get back on that train, and
Mhm.
start doing it, to be perfectly honest. But for me, it was just setting aside the time. It's like, hey, Emily, when are we going to do this? When are we going to sit down and kind of work through it?
Yeah.
Um, you have to be proactive in making time to be able to be proactive, right? It's just
Mhm.
that's the real gist about it.
That's great.
You don't just wake up one day and voila, reactively do a proactive thing, right? You have to be proactive in doing a proactive thing, right?
Well, I like how you give them inch by inch, bite by
Yeah.
bite, rather than trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite, obviously, is what some people try to do in the state plan. That's really hard to do. But
Yeah.
I know one thing that's key, especially, I mean, I obviously my whole thing's about ripple effect, right? I mean, hence the
Mhm.
name Money Ripples. Although I have my family too, I know with each of these people here and those even watching this recording later, the big thing is the ripple effect I'm excited about creating is not just what it does for this first generation pioneers. Really, all my clients are pioneers. Most of them are first generation figuring this out, doing something different than previous generations. But now they've got this opportunity to have that reflect through generations beyond them too, which is exciting for me as well.
Yep.
So that's why I feel this is so stinking important. This literally means, I mean, this concept alone is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of wealth transfer with clients and everything else that we can have here. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
anyways,
And
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
uh, I think though too, it's I'm trying to figure out how do people catch this vision as
Hmm.
well. But a lot of people say, "Hey, my kids know what I stand for. They know what I care about." If
Hmm.
I were to, if I were to create this as like a line graph
Hmm.
of and label it retention of values or retention of or knowledge of what the first generation, the wealth creator, stood for,
Yeah.
of course, it's going to be at the very top. And hopefully, I'm not doing this backwards for you guys. I don't know how I come off, but of course, it's going to be really, really high, 100% knowledge of values
Hmm.
for everyone who's attending. You start seeing a little bit of attrition G2, right?
Hmm.
Kids, the massive drop off happens at grandkids.
Yeah.
That's when you really start seeing an attrition of value system
Hmm.
or attrition of knowing what you stood for, right? It's really that G3, because I think G2, your kids are not qualified to pass that on because we're not necessarily having those explicit conversations with the kids, right? They kind of
Hmm.
intuitively know what you stood for because they've lived with you for, however many years old they were. But grandkids, I mean, just as an example, My mom's dad, I never knew because he died before they got married. My dad's dad died when I was 14. All my grandmothers are alive, but it's not like I don't have a good relationship with them, but I'm not necessarily close with
Mhm.
them. We haven't like sat down and learned about their life and stuff like that. Like, I don't really know what I would tell my kids about my grandparents. Like, I know my dad's dad was a propulsion engineer for submarines for the US Navy.
Mhm.
That's about it. Like, other than
Yeah.
the personal history that he wrote. If not for that, I'd be at a loss of what to share. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm not even sure what I'd tell my kids about my dad because, like, I know who he is, but I don't know how to put it into words.
Right.
And that's the tricky part. And that's where you see this massive drop off in knowing what those wealth creators stand for. Is kids know them, but they don't know what to say about them
Mhm.
because the wealth creators aren't having those explicit conversations with them.
Yeah.
And grandkids just, they have no idea, let alone great grandkids and stuff like that. It's really hard to keep that. I'm going to use a business term, but institutional knowledge,
Mhm.
really hard to keep that from generation to generation. But having it written down can help protect against a lot of that.
I agree. Yeah, there's well, I shared this experience with you already, but for me, about 13 years ago, I watched, there was a state planner that came into our office as we are talking. This is when I worked with Garrett Gunderson back in the day, right? And as the state planner came in, he said, "Hey, here's what we did with John Wooden, who's the famous UCLA basketball coach, right?" And this is just before he passed away. So he was 90 years old, and he started recording these videos, imparting of these values and lessons, almost like it's, you see the John Wooden quotes that are popular out there that are like great wisdom, but then to hear it from his own mouth, seeing his face and experiencing that, for primarily his grandkids and great grandkids, that expanded my vision so much beyond. Between that and the movie The Ultimate Gift, which I know we've talked about too, right? It's like, oh my goodness, like that is what I want. Like, I want not just the money to pass down, but I want the lessons and for them to become better. That not just like the G3, like you were saying, the grandkids who just become entitled, spoiled idiots, right? Jerks. We don't want that. We want them to actually do better than what we did ourselves, not just financially, but even with their own lives, right? And give them that ability to express and become, as you said, more purposeful and greater expression of who they are.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. And really with the because I know we're a minute over. I don't want to be taking too much time out of people's days. Obviously, we could talk about this all day.
yeah.
But just you've mentioned Rockefellers, John Wooden, the
Mhm.
Rothschilds are another famous family, right?
Yeah.
It really the only difference between them and quote unquote normal people
Mhm.
is their platform, right?
Mhm.
The intentional, and that's the reason why I love that so many of people that you work with say, "Hey, how do we do this with the Rockefellers? How like them?"
Mhm.
There's no hidden secret to that. There's nothing that says, "Hey, once you reach $100 million or $10 million or $1 billion, this whole world opens up and is possible, and all of us normal people can't be as intentional as them." That's not true at all, right? It's
Mhm.
John Wooden is famous for winning, what was it, 10 out of 10 NCAA championships in a row, or 10 out of 12, or just
Right.
being best basketball coach ever. Um, but he's the only reason why he's different from the rest of us is his platform. Um, everyone has had unique life experiences
Mhm.
that give them a unique perspective and unique um, wisdoms that they can impart and share with their loved ones that would be incredibly, incredibly valuable if they ever thought to share them, right? Or it's kind of the other way to put that quote, right? Net worth is not your self worth,
Mhm.
right? Not to be too cliche, that's 100% right. Your self worth is never defined by your net worth. And the things that you can pass on, yes, we are normal people, but we're all special and unique at the same time, right? And so
That's right.
you have unique lessons that can be passed on, irregardless of how much money we have to pass on. And our loved ones love hearing those things once they know that they're there and once they know what those things are. They just grab onto that because they love you all and you're special to them and you're unique to them. Um, you're kind of like their John Wooden, if you will, even if the rest of the world doesn't realize that.
Right.
Right. So anyway, that's my pep talk for the day for everybody.
I love it. Well, let's open up for a few questions that we have here from the group that's here live. What questions do you guys have? Like, what for your own situation? What questions do you have here for Brandon?
They're deep in thought.
Joe had something, but then he was back. Oh, you're on mute right now. There you go.
Interestingly enough, just had a conversation last evening with my son, who called me up as he and his wife were doing some estate planning. So I think that the first thing that I'll probably do is to share the recording with Joni, my wife, but then I'm actually going to ask them, if I can forward this on to them, and they'll, look at it, because a lot of what you were sharing with us, Brandon, I think would really resonate with them, given what I know is their background, because they have youngsters as well.
Mm-hmm.
And everything last night was really like, who should be, this custodian, and who should be that custodian, and we're setting up this and we're setting up that. But you're lending certainly a much different and much more global, universal type of perspective, which I think that they would find tremendously value, because as we went through this conversation, Adam said to me, "So what exactly happened when Grandma died?" And I just don't remember, what was going on at that point in time, and so on and so forth. And it was, it's 20 years ago now. So I'm like thinking back and saying, probably could revisit some of these things for their benefit, because he felt like he was in the dark on that. It wasn't necessarily, but it wasn't something that at the time, we felt was germane to the situation. But I can appreciate what it is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you get
great point.
contact information, certainly, if anyone would like to just follow up with you from this perspective.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we need to put your contact info on here too. That would be great.
Oh, yeah, that would be good. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I wish I had thought about that before. I don't know. I don't know the best way to do that. So
I could type it in here right now, but
oh, that's right, with the chat. I didn't think about the chat. It's a good idea.
Yep. So
yeah, and if anyone does have any other further questions down the road, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. So not a problem.
Absolutely.
I have a question,
Sure.
but it's about the nuts and bolts. I have been toying with this idea. I'm creating a trust, but I'm a little bit confused. I did go to an estate attorney, and basically he said, it's whatever you want. And I'm like, yes, but there has to be a structure already there for me. And I kept trying to basically almost pull his teeth, and he just gave me nothing. He just said, well, you write up whatever you want and we'll put it in legalese. So there I ended up with, this one, which the Kim Butler book, trustworthy, entrusted. I mean, I'm reading everything about the subject because I already paid for that trust, and I'm really upset because they're giving me nothing. They just say, you write it up and we'll put it in legalese. It's like, why am I hiring you if all you're doing is being a paper pusher? It's like, I didn't need to do that for that. So I'm very confused by this whole thing, especially the part of the life insurance is a part where my kids can borrow, let's say, but they have to return it. But then my own monies are the part that I can leave as a legacy to them. And for example, I wanted samples of what do people do? What do the Rockefellers do? How much are my kids supposed to take out where it doesn't threaten the core of the trust, so that it can go on multi-generationally? I thought those were normal questions. But this attorney just said, well, you figure it out and then I'll write it up. So I'm very frustrated with the whole process. Am I off in asking these questions?
Those are great questions.
That's a great question. What's the nicest way to say this? I think that
Be nice. It's okay. Just say it.
no. And it's not nice to you, Patricia. I'm trying to be nice to the other attorney. My experience is that there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of talk about it, but I think with your question, there's two types of attorneys. There are order takers,
Right, is what I got.
as you put it, or attorneys who are counselors,
Mm-hmm.
who walk you through it and have their own sets of questions and stuff like that. For me, it's to use purposeful planning as an example, right? I hear a lot of attorneys who say, yes, they care about their clients expressing their values and stuff like that, but ultimately they say the same thing, just, hey, just write it up and we'll put it in. Really what that means is that is not actually part of their process. They can't lead out and help you get to that point. And so, yeah, ultimately you're working with an order taker attorney who what you're trying to do is outside of either their expertise or their comfort level.
They just a questionnaire, basically, to fill out how much I need to each kid, what percentage. Well, that's not what I'm doing. And from the very beginning, I said, no, I want the Rockefeller style. At the time, I had only read that one book.
Yeah.
I know more about it now, but I'm very disappointed, and I'm happy to never refer anyone to that law firm and tell everybody not to go there,
Yeah. What I would, the last thing that I would say, Patricia, is, is Chris put my contact information in the chat? Mm-hmm. Why don't you email me? I will feel more at ease to give some additional specific thoughts on a one-on-one conversation rather than a recorded conversation with the group.
Can you tell he's an attorney? He's trying to cover his butt right now.
I am trying to cover my butt. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to be nice in public so I can be really mean in private. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, just send me an email and I'll kind of talk to you about some of those thoughts. So
all right, I appreciate it.
So those are exactly the questions we want you guys to all be asking. That's perfect. It's one thing to do the order taking version, which is just give me the structure and that's it. But Patricia, you want to go much deeper than that. And that's exactly where I see all of you guys going, if not now, at some point down the road.
Right. And you and I were talking about the life insurance aspect of it. And I kept not understanding, thinking, okay, but that's just only borrowing. It's like, I already have money. It's like, when will that become something useful to anybody, including myself at the time when I first got started? Now I have lots of investments, so it's different. But at the beginning, it's like, okay, I've got this. What do I do with it? But now I'm seeing it as a two-legged approach, where at least there's the life insurance and then there's my own money. So, and of course it will grow once I get that life insurance going. For example, something that Kim Butler talks about, and I'm not sure how to operate that to make it keep going. At what point does generation 2, okay, I'm 1. So at what point does generation 2 start buying their own life insurance, and who do they make the beneficiary if this is a family trust?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Great question. Really specific questions. Mm-hmm. To be able to give you really specific answers, I think it makes sense. I'm more than happy to walk you through all that stuff. But yeah, if you're talking about a family trust where everyone, the super simple answer is you can kind of go about it one of two ways. You can have each generation creates their own trust, and they can kind of do it that way.
What do they do that?
There's going to be a little personal preference there, to be perfectly honest.
But what makes sense?
What makes sense?
Yeah, in terms of growing a legacy.
On a legacy side, it's really hard to give a hard and fast answer. I know of some families that are, they have family offices, so they're $50, $75, $100 million. And they have kids opting out of that family structure all the time. They're like, you know what? We don't want to have all of our assets commingled with everybody else. And other people in that same family don't have an issue with it at all. So ultimately, it is going to come down to personal preference. But what I also would say is that there's no floor or ceiling to when you create that type of design structure, right? And nor do you want your kids to feel forced to participate in a one trust for everybody, because then they're just going to check out and you're going to get disengagement, which is the last thing that you want to, right? So there's a little bit of personal preference. There's space for you to say what your preference is and what your intentionality is. And so there are some structures that we could put into that type of a situation, but ultimately you have to let people choose to opt in or opt out. But you can do both. You can have each family member has their own separate trust. There might end up being a situation where it's just one trust for everybody, and the beneficiaries of that life insurance is going to be appropriate, right? If they have their own trust is going to be the beneficiary. If it's one trust for everybody, it's going to be the one trust for everybody that would be the beneficiary. It just depends on what the structure ends up looking like. So
with that scenario, they all keep having their own individual trusts, but then there is the one I created where they can, let's say, get the interest from on a monthly basis or something like that.
Yep. Totally. And that way is much more prevalent, where everyone has their own individual trust. I see that way more often. It doesn't necessarily mean that's a better option, because better is going to be whether it's better or not is a personalized answer for you and your family as a whole and all the other members of your family. So those are just in-depth conversations to have individually and as a family, to say what's our value system and what structure best expresses and carries out your value system, right? And then just go from there, right? So the life insurance beneficiary conversation is probably step 4 or 5. The steps 1 through 4, steps 1 through 3, or whatever is exactly where you are.
Because those can vary too. What you want to do on that's personalized. Because, like, for example, as a general rule of thumb, at least from my standpoint, doing the insurance, right? Typically, it's going to be that the spouse is going to be the primary beneficiary, and then the trust would be the contingent. So if the spouse is gone, then because at least from a financial standpoint, when it transfers to the spouse, there's no tax, right? There's no estate tax or anything there. So that's where the trust becomes that contingent. However, if you're single, you probably would have the trust as the primary, right? Or if you, here's another thing too, is that maybe the spouse that doesn't want to deal with it, maybe they want the trust to dictate everything. So maybe you want to have it to where the trust is actually more the primary beneficiary, so that the spouse can say, all right, all the directives are in the trust. I don't have to think about it or receive it myself. It's all there, right? It's really individual.
Yeah, it's completely individual. So, but we can talk about that, Patricia, and kind of walk you through that a little bit.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So better copy down this address here in this email thing.
Yeah, write down Brandon. It's for those of you that can't see it. You're probably listening to the recording. His email is Brandon. That's with a D-O-N, in case you think of weird spellings, So BRANDON at Rains, that's RAINS -law.com. So Brandon at rains-law.com.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, Brandon, I appreciate your time. This has been good stuff. And of course, like everybody else, encourage you guys to reach out and really create something that's more intentional than just the template, right? Like, there's quick, easy legal ways to do it, easy legal planning. There's the ways to do that, but then there's ways that you say, hey, I want this to be perpetual wealth. I want something to be more intentional here. So encourage you guys to reach out to Brandon. I was excited to find him in the first place because the attorneys I've used basically say, hey, we're too busy. We can't handle it. So, I'm glad that we at least got somebody who's willing to talk to us and spend the time with us. So Brandon, thank you so much. That speaks volumes about you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and looking forward to answering any other additional questions that people may have down the road.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody, thanks so much. And like I said, we'll see you next month. We got some good things coming down the pipe, so be looking forward to that. So everybody have a great day. We'll see you.